Boom. Oh man, this is gonna be a lot of fun. Okay, welcome to a brand new lesson. This is actually video 7 of 10 in the free building destruction class I just released. And I wanted to make this lesson public because I wanted to show you how much fun we're having inside the free course. If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure to use the link below this video to get all 10 private videos inside the class absolutely free. Oh, you also get the footage, the 3D scene files of all the buildings, professionally made, like I said, the footage with everything else to follow along in the lesson. I also supplied FBX and Alembic, so that way you can use this in other software packages if you prefer. Also, one thing I want to quickly mention too is I just did a VFX artist react video with the Corridor crew. That was a lot of fun. I can't believe we hit 1 million views in less than 12 hours. So freaking cool. This was a chance for me to talk about some of the movies I've worked on, as well as share a lot of advice and thoughts from my experience working in Hollywood film. Now, on top of that, if you are in the free class that we're doing right now, you'll be able to access the farmhouse model as well, absolutely free. So you'll be able to get this full production model to work with as well. So click the link below this video to make sure you grab that. And we're actually going to get into a lot of really cool stuff in this video. So pay attention as we go through this class, because I discuss wood splintering dynamics, rope dynamics to create the epic wrecking ball simulation, and just so much other stuff. I'm really excited to get started. Finally, I'll just say that we've done a lot in the couple of days that we've been going through this free class together, and I always think how a lot of us overestimate what we can accomplish in such a small time going through all the training, but I also think how a lot of us underestimate what we can accomplish in an extended period like a year of focused training, goals, the right support and mindset to really make a transformation in what we're doing. So think about what you could accomplish staying focused, staying committed for an entire year, and what kind of transformation you could have in your career that would last a lifetime. Because I think a lot of us, we like to dabble, but to make that commitment to ourselves is where you're really going to get the most growth. I want you to go through this training focused on thinking about what your big questions are, but also what you really want to accomplish. What's the end game with learning this training? For a lot of us, is to work in Hollywood feature films, video games, and take all of the knowledge and apply it to create a successful career. So let this lesson and the lessons we do for the rest of this free class be the tipping point for that, to use to get the rest of your career to really take off. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so what we got is this cabin model, and it's broken up into a few different elements. Basically the roof, which is all planks, which is called roof plank. There you go. And then we have the frames, which is all the internal struts for the whole thing. And then we have the walls, which is kind of the front and the sides. So originally when this was modeled, there's like some random image I found off the internet, which was like a barn. I'm like, yeah, I want this. And it's, yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking about the proportions. It's a freaking gigantic barnyard. So this is something I'd been sitting on for quite a while and decided, you know, hey, would it be fun to destroy it just because the roof's made of all planks? It kind of could be fun to do. So the other thing is we got the foundation, which is just this block here, which I don't think we're going to use, but it's good to have just in case. And then we have the ground, which is here. So I've already created a layer called effects. Let's just make that active, and that way anything I put in here is going to, or anything I create is going to land in there. So the first thing I want to do is just drop in Tyflow into the scene. Tyflow currently is completely free, so you know, obviously you can go to tyflow.com and download it, get it all set up. So now I'm going to bring up my editor. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm assuming a lot of us are, you know, going through the building destruction training that I've put out. So, you know, at this point you should be pretty comfortable destroying stuff, but just in case you haven't gone through the training, definitely sign up, get access to the training, because we cover a lot of the fundamentals. So not only will it make more sense, but we get a lot more advanced with it. And then later lessons, we get ultra advanced, because I'm teaching how to do stuff for Hollywood film, not for just fun tutorials from people in the basement or whatever, but what we do in production. So I think it's really critical to do things the right way. What I want to do is I'm going to set up the, I think the destruction ball first would make the most sense. And then from there, we can begin to play with it and have it smash into this structure. So to begin, I'm just going to go to my front viewport. Let's do this. I'm going to create let's create a box. And that will be the kind of the hinge that this swings back and forth on. So I'm going to go to the modify panel. I'll make it as 200, 200, 200. And that way we just have a simple cube. And I'll go to the hierarchy here. Effect center pivot. So that way it's just going to create the particle in the very center. And now that we got that, I'm going to create a sphere, and that's going to represent just kind of the end point. So it isn't actually going to be the wrecking ball itself. We can do that later. I just want something to kind of represent where this is going to sit. So for now, I'm just going to put this over here somewhere. So again, the wrecking ball, we can choose how big we want it to be. I'm just trying to say this is going to be the end of the rope. So now that we've got those two things set up, I'm going to go in here and start to build out our system. And the easiest way to do this, and there's so many ways to do it, but we'll just call this wrecking ball. And I'm going to add the cube and the sphere. And we'll just call this wrecking ball origin. And then ball pos, I guess, for ball position, something like that. So we've added both of these in. And the next thing I'd want to do is I just want to set a relationship between the two of these. So if I set a set target, what this will allow me to do is to specify where I want this to go. So target means it's going to seek another particle. And so we've got two particles in here currently. What I can do here is I can change it from value to, again, there's so many ways to do it. I'm just going to do random because it's 2 points. So like, what is it going to do? I'm going to say this event only. Again, right now it doesn't matter. It might matter later on. And yeah, we just want to target all. So I think at that point, it's kind of everything we need to do. So it should be able to randomly pick the only other option it has. But from here, I'm going to do a resample. So this is important because once we've defined what the target is, I can say, okay, let's create a lot of points in between A and B. All right. So just so we can see this, I'm going to create a new event here. And so the new particles can go in here. So this is actually going to be the rope. We're going to have the origin point and the wrecking ball position. And then let's generate all the rope in between. So we'll just call this, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. We'll just call this rope. And by the way, if I go too fast or, you want to know more about this, I have so many videos. I got hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel. And obviously, I've got lots of other training available. So, I can go through this a lot more in depth. So with the resampling, we want to keep it on interpolate. So obviously it's going to do it in between everything, but we want to set this to specifically go to the target. So now it's going from one to the other. So this particle is saying, well, hey, I set my target to be this guy here, and let's just generate all of these points into this new event, which get put into here in between all of this. So we do have controls about how how fine we want this to be. Like we can set this to be, very broken up. I'm going to set it to be like ultra fine. So again, that's up to you. We can also cap the amount of particles through here as well. So there's definitely options in here as to, how crazy you want to get. So the threshold's based on distance, obviously. So those two controls will allow you to get complete control over how fine you want this to be. And I think the key point from there will be that we still have the remaining particles. So I want to put them into an event as well. And in this case, I think I'm just going to send those out here as well. But it's important that we bring them out because we want to be able to define the whole relationship. So at this point, we've already generated a procedural kind of system that's actually completely easy for us to move around. So not only that, but I can move the entire thing. So that's the important thing. That's why I'm doing it this way, is because I want to be able to say, well, what if we move the wrecking ball to hit from this angle or that angle? I just wrote a script to randomly generate dozens of caches of the wrecking ball to smash into stuff, and then all those caches are generating on my render farm right now. So just for fun, I'm going to have like 20 different simulations of just the wrecking balls smashing into the cabin. Oh, sorry, into the farmhouse, just for fun. So, once you set up in an intelligent way, you can do all of that. So I think the key thing from here would be to just define or more kind of anchor each point, because right away, if we want to, we can set this up. Like, I'm going to just quickly set up a shape, and we need to define a shape even though it's not going to be renderable. It's important that we define something because we want to work with physics, and for the physics to work, we need to have some kind of shape for it to deal with. So I'm just going to change the shape to 3D geometry. My scene scale is ridiculously big, so I'm going to have to set this to 150,000, I think. Let's change the display to geometry just so we can see this. Okay, so 150,000 is kind of nuts. Let's bring it down a bit. Maybe that. Either way, just something that we can work with. So perhaps I can make this a bit smaller. Let's try 5,000. And going back to my resample, for now, I might just set this to 50, and that way we just, it's just, it's not as crazy. But while we've got that set up, I'm going to do a physics shape. And that way the physics shape will allow it to become dynamic. So the next problem we have is that by default, TyFlow has gravity enabled, which isn't a bad thing. It's just some events I might want to have gravity. So going to modify panel with TyFlow selected, we can go into the physics rollout, and we have default gravity, ground collider. We can turn both of those off. And that way nothing's going to fall unless we tell it to. So, okay, so the only other stuff I need to really do here is we need to create a gravity for this first of all. So let's just put in a force, and we'll make the force to set the gravity to -1. That way it's all falling. And the next thing would be to set up some bindings, so that way all of this is bound together, right? So if I do a physics bind, I need to make sure, because ordering is important, I need to put this underneath the shape. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to connect all of these together. So it's going to act more like rope or string or whatever. And there's a few different ways you can do rope inside of TyFlow. But in this case, this was the way I decided, because you could either, there's so many different ways, whether it's cloth, whether you're actually more doing like rope dynamics, but for now I'm just going to do it this way. I won't mess with the settings just yet. I think what would be important is just to set up the restraints. So, constraints, I should say. So I'm just going to do a surface test. And again, there's a few more elegant ways to do this, but I'm just going to pick this wrecking ball origin. So key thing here is that we've made the cube smaller enough that it's just encapsulating this one particle. So now if we go into surface test, we can change this to volume inside, which means it's encapsulating just this one particle inside the cube. So we can see that that tests true. So now that that's working, right now everything is still falling. It's not working at all. But the main thing is this one particle is locked. We've bound it to this, to this object. So if only these two systems could talk to each other, these two events. If we go back to physics glue, we scroll all the way down to family. So we just expand the family bind, and we say mostly just bind to siblings, but I'm turning on both anyway. What that's going to do is it means that when this particle goes into the new event, there's still a relationship between the two. So right now, we can see that there actually is this relationship where that particle is bound. It's still, you know, being bound up here, but all the other particles are connected to it. And, you know, we can play more with that in a moment, but key thing now is that once we've got that set up, we can look at creating the big wrecking ball as well. So again, down here we have this one particle. We just want to encapsulate that one. It's exactly like before. I'm just going to copy, paste this and remove it, add the other one. And that way we have the wrecking ball and we have the origin. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to rename this to wrecking ball and origin. So with the wrecking ball, we can test, as soon as we actually give it an event to go into, it'll test true. What I'd like to do here is assign a new shape, I think would be important. So if I do shape, make it a sphere, we do low res, you can do whatever you want. Same deal, I want to make this rather big, so why don't we try 150,000? So the important thing here is we need to actually see how big this is. So I'm going to say display geometry, and we can see that it's rather big now. So I might not want it to be this big. I think for now I'll leave it that large. It will affect this a little bit just because it's physically quite large. I'm just going to do a physics shape for this and put it underneath. Technically, if we wanted, we could put it in its own collision group. I won't worry about that yet, or maybe I will. It's kind of crazy. So if this is spazzing out, then we can fix that. We can just say ignore start penetrations, and that should work fine. The other thing is we could put it in its own collision setup, but for now I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, so at least now we got this gigantic ball swing, and we could give this some distance, because right now it's kind of like right next to everything. So if I wanted to, I could get the sphere, and I can move this really far back, and I can move this really far up. And the cool thing is that it's all automatically updating, whereas some other setups wouldn't do that, which is why I want to do it this way. I want to be a bit more smarter about it. And the rope does stretch, and it does fall out a little bit, so we can definitely play with that. But the main thing is, right now, we've already got this swinging ball moving through. So going back in here, we can go into object bind. Actually, instead of object bind, what we could do is just copy our physics shape here, and we'll paste it in here. And under dynamics, we can just lock the position XYZ. I think that's probably the smartest way to go. And that way, it's just going to stay where it is, and it's going to swing down and do its thing. So, cool thing, again, I can just move this wherever I want, and let it swing through, and we can get the kind of trajectory we want. And in real time, I can even move this up a little bit. So the last little trick that I think would be really cool is, I'm going to rename these to Wrecking Ball and Origin. We could do a spline paths, and the spline I'll put down the very bottom. We'll keep it on trajectories, click Create, and that's going to create a new spline. And we might as well rename this to Wrecking Ball Trajectory. So by doing this, we're actually drawing a spline from the, the wrecking ball position, and we can see exactly what it's doing. So why is this important? Because again, in production, we want to be able to see with fairly good accuracy, what we need to adjust. So I might swing this through and be like, oh, you know what? I just want to hit the tip of the barn. I can move this up, and I can see with pretty good confidence that I'm just going to smash the tip there now. So that could be important for me to do without needing to, to go back and forth and try and figure that out. So just in general, it's kind of good just to see, like visualize what the simulation's doing. So we've got all that set up. We're in a pretty good place. I'm just going to rename this to trajectory so it's easy to spot. And I think we're in a pretty good spot now. We can create a mesh for this, which I think is important to do. So we'll do another spline paths. Again, put it down the bottom. And this one, though, we'll treat a little bit differently. We'll say, let's use siblings. And we'll just click on create. So it's going to generate a new one. And we'll just call this rope spline. So as this comes through, let's turn off display so we don't see the those points because they're not as necessary now. And we can just turn this on so it's visible. And we'll turn on multiply by not radius. And now we can see that we have the rope. And again, you can control the radius if you want this to be thicker or anything like that. But now we have a physical rope that if we want to render it or anything, it's there, it's physical. So again, we can see it's there. Cool. So we've done that. We've got a system that works. Last couple of things, just more for general house cleaning. I'm going to create a point. Let's just create it there for a second, and I guess at this size, like 1,000 is probably a good one, and I'm going to create a second one. So let's just call this wrecking ball rig, and then we'll call this one wrecking ball pause for position. So I'm going to move, in fact, I'm just going to use align right there. I'm going to align it to that sphere. Cool. And the whole point of this is I just want something that's easy to select. So going back in, I'm going to make this 2,000 or 3,000. Something that's easy for me just to grab and move around. Same thing with this guy. This is the general rig that I want to use. So I might just put this up here, I guess. But I'm going to make this 5,000 just so it's really obvious. It's kind of a little too obvious. So at least now it's just easy for me to be able to see where these are. So I'm just going to get this box. I'm going to hit link or parent and just connect it there. And then this little sphere, I'm going to do the same thing to that. So I guess the final thing that I will do is I'm going to add in a speed. And speed, I'm going to change this to icon. Oops, sorry, icon. And this way we can give it like an initial thrust, like some initial velocity. Rather than letting it gently fall down, we can throw it where we want. So I'm going to click create new, and then I'm going to call this wrecking ball speed. And I still have that selected, so I'm going to hit the align, wherever it is here. I have hotkeys for everything, so I set these hotkeys up like 20 years ago, and I always got to think, like, where is it in the interface? So I'm just going to move the speed to the center of that. And okay, that thing is freaking tiny as well. So let's give this 1,000, at least something to start with. I'm going to rotate this. And then, yeah, let's go for like 5,000, 5,000. Let's get rid of the logo. We'll keep the icon. But the whole idea is that this would allow me... I'm going to make it a little bit tinier. But it's going to allow me to easily be able to see where, what direction I want to throw this. So I might aim this a little bit more down. And again, I'm just going to hit parent and parent it to this. So now I have this set up where I can change the direction it's going to get thrown and everything that I want to do with it. And I guess the icing on the cake with that would be to give it some trajectory. So I'm going to move this in here. I should actually put this here. I'm going to put it below all that so it establishes the physics shape and everything else. Then we assign the velocity, but it would make more sense for it to come in here. I'll just give it like a velocity of 250, something like that. And the whole point is that now we can, in fact, maybe I will put it up the top. The whole point is that now we can fire this out and let it move in the direction we want. And it's just definitely going to help us get some initial velocity to what we're doing. And we could go crazy as well. You know, you can make it 1,000, you can do whatever you want. You can kind of see that it's kind of fighting itself by doing that. But, you know, this is just going to give it a bit of an initial push. So if it's just hanging here, we can kind of throw it in the direction we want. There is a few more things we need to do, but I'd rather get into the dynamics and then we can deal with that. So this is, at this point, our setup. We've got the whole wrecking ball system working. It's all named. Now let's start working on doing all of this stuff. So I'm going to hide the planks. I'm going to hide the walls. Let's just deal with the frames for now and get that all working. So I'm just going to... I'm just wondering, I don't really want to accidentally select any of this stuff. So I'm going to go into tie spline, turn icon off. Okay, so hopefully I'm only selecting the geometry there. Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's import all this stuff. I'm just going to put in, we'll call this barn frame. Sorry, what am I doing? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Birth objects, and then we'll call this barn frame. And we'll say add selected, and that's going to move everything into place. So now we have all these particles representing it. If we change the display to geometry, then we can hide the frame layer, and we can see a particle version of it. So now that we've imported this, there's things that we want to do. I think the first thing that would be important would be just to set this up as a physics shape, so that way it's dynamics. And that way we got all that working. Now, by doing that, we don't have any gravity or anything assigned, but now the ball can come down and crash into it, which is kind of cool. So again, no gravity, but all of that is working. So again, just play through that. And you see there's a lot of resistance. So this ball is hitting it, and it's kind of still has resistance about it. So the way that we can change that is that we can actually assign mass to the wrecking ball. And that plays such an important factor here. So I think the best thing to do would be to maybe give this a value of like 10,000 or something really, really big. And that way it's not going to question itself. So mass in the physics, we go override the mass with 1 by default. We're saying this is going to be 10,000 times heavier or stronger or more forceful than this is. And this is a way that as we go forward, we can get this to really hit it and push everything out of the way. We'll get more into that later, but same thing, I just like to do this with the physics here, would be to override this by at least a little bit. So we'll just set the rope to be about 100. And the reason is I want the rope to actually cut through things. That was a requirement that I gave myself, that, you know, if this is really low to the ground, I want to see the rope cutting through all the shapes, which I think would be really cool. So at least now we got it kind of, you know, kind of navigating a little bit. It's a little bit messy, but it's working. Same thing with this though. We could go in and we could multiply this more by setting this up to be like 001. And now there's such a difference in mass. So as we get into it further, this will play a big factor. So the key thing here, though, is that right now it's not very destructible. It kind of hits and it's doing its thing, but all of this needs to break. So, you know, I've seen stuff out there, like people trying to cover wood. Wood is really simple. There's nothing magical about it. It's just how you set up your fracturing. So some other time I'll put together a video on modeling for destruction, but your pivots and everything else play a big factor here. But I want to pre-frag the geo. So I'm going to add in a Voronoi, which will cut everything up. And it's important that we put it before the physics shape, so that way it generates the correct convex shapes for this. So we'll do it here, and I'm just thinking whether there's anything specific we need to do. I think the main thing is we don't really need many points. 10, I think, is fine. I do want these to cut based on the surface. That's going to give us a bit more accuracy. But the main thing is just going to be the scaling. So in this case, I'm going to set my scaling to 10 by 10, and in the Y, make it 0.1. And that way it's going to cut more horizontally. So the key thing about this is I'm just trying to get this to mostly to just cut apart enough that we can work with it. But we could make this more like wood splinters. I'm just going to change the orientation till we get more splintery. So by doing it that way, you see we're getting more of the splinter kind of effect. The thing is, I kind of don't want it to be that crazy. So if I set this to 1, so 10, 10, 1, that's breaking it up enough that we're getting, you know, smaller pieces initially. And the thing is that once the ball hits it, and by the way, you can see it's kind of slowly falling apart. To fix that, we're just going to physics shape, collisions, ignore start penetrations. And that will all keep it in place. See? So that just means it's not kind of pushing each other out from the very beginning. But as this comes in, we've got all these cuts here, which aren't very interesting, but as it comes close, I actually want these to break more, kind of anticipate the break, and break apart before they hit. So what we'll do is we can set up a property test. And sorry for that beep, whenever I hit enter, it's triggering that. So I'm going to change this to be neighbors. And with the neighbors, I need this to be able to know what the wrecking ball is. So I'm going to go in my wrecking ball and do a particle group. Again, put it down the bottom, just good practice. And I'm going to change this to export group A. And that means that I can specifically say group A, if you come near me within a certain radius, then is this going to cut up even more? It's going to send to a new event. So let's create that new event. I'm going to create just a display so we got something to test true for. And I'm going to change this to red. Okay. Right now it's testing true just because it's we set it to neighbors, but it's searching for itself. So it's like, well, I'm near something, so it's testing true. Change this to geometry, and I'm going to change my display here to default, and that way I can see, man, that's bright. I can see that these are testing true, but I don't want it to test true in itself. I want it to test true to group A. So now you should not be testing true. Oh, okay, so it's saying less. So let's say greater than, and we're going to set this up where we set 0 for the test value. So as soon as it's getting any hint of it, it's going to test true. And we can set the range to be something like 400. If you're ever not sure what range to put in, make a sphere, and you can say, okay, 400 is about that range. Okay, so it'll just help you kind of visualize like what units to put in. So 400 is a good amount, so we can see that these are still white. But it's going to look, and if the wrecking ball, which is this group here, comes within 400 radius, is going to test true. So now, again, we can scrub through. The ball's coming down. We can see that cool trajectory of where it's swinging into. And as it comes in, we can say, are you testing true yet? And it doesn't seem to be. So we can make the radius a bit bigger. Let's try 550. So I just threw in 1,000. Where am I? Sorry, here. So I just threw in 1,000 to test this out, and that seems to be working. You can see it's turning red here, kind of anticipating that. If it's hard to see, you can always just turn the display off. So when it comes into the new event, those pieces disappear. So what we want to do is just have it anticipate the crash a little bit early and just kind of break those areas up a little bit more to allow it to then smash it apart. So, you know, if we want to get really accurate, we could try like 900, something like that. We don't need to get crazy, because again, like 3 frames, 4 frames, what is that, 1/10 of a second? Like, that's not a big deal. So as it comes in, we can see the pieces are now beginning to disappear, so that's showing that it's working. So that just means that they're now in this event. And what we can do with this is we can set it up to fracture even more. So I'm going to do another Voronoi. And this Voronoi, we actually want it to break into smaller pieces. So again, with this one, we want to break randomly on the surface. We'll give it like 25 pieces, something like that. And the main thing is going to be the scale of this. We could do... It's probably better that we can actually see what it's doing. So I'm just going to jump ahead a few frames. So right now, they're just breaking into small chunks, which is really ugly. All we would want to do here is say like 0.1, and then I'm going to say like 10. I kind of know the values to put in, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit here. But the main thing is that before it's just cutting it uniformly, whereas by doing it this way, we're cutting it more elongated, so it's still cutting into splinters. I don't want to have like really long, stupid splinters, but we're getting those more wood-like cuts going through it. So that's a bit more interesting. Now we're getting something really cool. The thing is, half of this stuff, if I look here, not all of it being moved is red, and that means that it's because all of this is physical, right? So the other stuff isn't testing true because it didn't go near the sphere, but it is being knocked around. So some of this stuff ends up being airborne. If I turn display off, we can see that at least this piece here, for instance, is still in this event. It didn't get affected by the sphere, but it is moving. So we can set up another one. I'm just going to call this ball proximity, and then let's copy, paste, rename vel threshold, if I can spell. I still can't spell. So with this one, I'm going to turn the export group off, and we're actually going to change this instead to be velocity magnitude. And what I'm really doing is I'm testing to make sure that there is some kind of velocity to this. So I would say if it's more than 25 units greater than, really important, then it's going to test true, and we can send it to this event as well. So this means that if anything has motion, because none of this should have any motion, it means that as this ball comes in, if there are any bits that get knocked by the other bits of wood and they begin to fall or move around, that's when they'll test true and they'll go into this event as well. So now we're talking. Now we're getting some cool results. We already set up gravity up here. I'm just going to steal this guy, right-click, copy, paste, and that way we've got gravity on our pieces. And with this, we can make it a bit more interesting. I'm just going to throw some values in. It isn't like I thought about this, but I'm just going to throw in... I'll make that smaller and I'll make that bigger. I'm just throwing in some values, okay? Like, it's not like I've really thought about this or thought, these are the magic settings. So don't worry so much about it. It's just more I'm saying the weaker one is the wider one, the bigger one, and the stronger one is the smaller one. And that means it's just going to help kind of break this up and make it a bit more chaotic. Again, I've got videos on my YouTube that cover a lot of turbulence, and in my courses we go through really breaking down the science of how to get like really realistic effects with this stuff. This lesson I'm more focused on just trying to set up like wood splinters and do all that. So this is looking cool. Problem is it's not colliding with the floor. So that's the next thing we want to do, is set up a physics collision. Not the modify. Sorry, get a cup of coffee right in front of me, which is kind of hindering me getting to my keyboard properly. Alright, so I'm going to add the floor in here. And that way it's a collision object. And And that's another thing too, is I have seen some people kind of like touch on doing wrecking balls and stuff, and they've done it in like a really, I don't know, like, how do I say this nicely? Like, basically just making a stick and making a sphere and running it through. And the whole thing is that, of course, it doesn't have any rope dynamics, but on top of that, it's not reacting to it. Like, this whole thing is one system. So when this hits, it's actually responding to it. It's getting some resistance as it pushes through. If we played with the masses, this could come in and hit it, and this could keep still, and the ball would have to roll over it and wouldn't affect it. Like, we can completely set things up where it's all dynamic. There's a two-way conversation between the ball and the dynamics of the wood, rather than it being just this, pendulum swinging back and forth on a stick. We're doing something a bit more interesting with it. So this is cool and everything, but I want to go further. I want to make this a bit more interesting, especially when we get to the wood. Okay, so by the way, that there, I think we got to lower that magnitude down a little bit more, say 10. But beyond that, let's actually set up the glue. Like, you can either use, sorry, I'm doing two things at once. You can either use clusters, or you can use the binding here, but I like binding, whether it's joints or glue. In this case, we'll just use glue. Just because it creates like a nicer kind of relationship. But for more, I'm trying to think of the right term here, for more rigid stuff, I guess, like concrete, stuff like that, clusters can come in handy. It just really depends on what you're going for. So I'm going to put this above the tests, and I think the main thing with this would be just to set a big enough range, because we're basically saying if anything within, let's say, 100 range, we can have 4 bindings. If there's anything near it, they're all going to have a bit of a relationship. And I think that's important to set up. And typically I'm going to put these on just so that way, if they move to a different event, which we could very well start setting up conditions for everything, so bigger pieces get broken more, or whatever we want to do, everything has that relationship. And I think we can probably do the exact same thing. In fact, I think I'm just going to copy this in here, and that way all that's set up. So one thing worth quickly mentioning is we also want the binds to be breakable. Really important. So we're just going to turn on torque and force for these. So that way when they hit, it can break that relationship. And same thing for these ones as well. So where are we at? Breakable. Okay. I don't think there's too much more I want to do with this. I think the one thing I will do is I might set this to stop. And that's just basically saying not to move. So that way, like, the pieces that get knocked around, if they get hit hard enough, they'll have a velocity for that one sample, and they'll test true and go in this event. But otherwise, I don't want the rest of the cabin to respond. I don't want to hit the cabin and like, the force of it causes the whole thing to collapse. I actually want this to stay standing still, and we just rip through it. I think it'd be way funner. So stop, we need to change this to continuous, and that way it's saying always keep still unless you're being hit really hard. Now, right now, if I were to fast forward a little bit, we've got a system that's working already. Like, there's not really much more we want to do with it, but I think the main thing from here might be to just set up the other parts of the structure. So I just jumped ahead a few frames and I had to wait for it to calculate. So that's why it skipped, was just because I jumped up here and it was still having to pre-roll the whole effect. But this is looking cool. Like, we've got something really neat. And the thing is too, that we can go back to our wrecking ball and we can set this up where the friction is a lot higher, and that's going to cause more pieces to kind of get caught on it, which would be kind of cool. Same thing with the collision ground here. Because this is wood, I think setting the friction fairly high, giving a bit of bounce with the restitution, both come into play. So I think that's important too. From here though, I'm just going to copy and paste our setup. And let's just disable this while we do it. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. We're going to call it barn roof. And then barn walls. And I think the easiest thing to do would just be to do a birth objects, drag it onto each of these. And going into the walls, we'll just say add selected. And then going into the roof, we'll say add selected. And finally, we can link all these up. Right click and choose enable. And now we just imported the whole thing. And all of this, all the rules we set up, because we did it intelligently, now it's going to be a bit slower because it's having to calculate a lot more. But the whole thing about this is that we've done this in a way where everything is automatically going to work because we thought ahead. We didn't try to mess around here and do something half-assed, and then later it's like, oh, there's so much work to, like, let's say if we're like, well, this is taking too long, why don't I just get my rig and move it down here? Oh, sorry, one last thing. Let's get our pause and move it to the rig, because this rig is meant to be moving everything, whereas if I wanted to move the origin itself, I can still move that around. So, you know, in this case, I'm going to move this down. I'm going to move this across. I'm going to change the orientation a little bit. And then we can enable this. And everything updates. Same thing that if we wanted to swap this out and put in a building, you know, we can do that too. So in this case, I'm going to disable the flow. Let's just enable something so we can see this a bit better. And we'll do that. But we're being smart about all of this, so that way, you know, I just changed so much. I threw this building together, I just moved this entire system, and everything automatically updates. And that's the smart way to do stuff, and that's what we do in production. I think it's really important to always think about how to do things better and how to do things in production rather than, let's say, just for fun, goofing around, you know, where you're going to get a result that's cool, but if someone gives you a client note or a studio note, the director or someone tells you to do something, you don't want to have to kind of remake everything you did because you didn't think ahead as to how it all plugs together. And that's kind of the critical thing that I always teach with courses and everything that we do is how do we set things up the way that you'll be expected to on day one of your job. So when you go work on a Marvel movie or for ILM, wherever you're going to go, you know to think ahead and do things properly rather than just adding crap everywhere. And then, you know, as soon as the request is that, you know, this has to splash through water or do something kind of left field, or you got 20 more shots to do, you're setting them all up individually. If I have 20 of these shots to do, and don't worry, we won't cache through this entire thing, but I think it's kind of fun just kind of watching in anticipation, the whole thing rip apart. But the key thing is that if I had 20 other shots, I can literally just delete the cabin, clean this up a little bit, name it right, save it as a rig, and I can even give it to other artists and say, you guys go and change this stuff. So what's interesting here, by the way, is that the mass seems to affect it, where it's not punching all the way through now. And that's something that I think is the icing on the cake we need to play with, is that this actually isn't pushing through. It's kind of stopping. So that's kind of the last thing I think we need to play with here. And it's mostly just because we moved the wrecking ball so close, so now it doesn't have that, you know, ramp up time to kind of gain weight and momentum. So all we need to do, I'm just going to disable this for a second. Going to our wrecking ball, I'm going to put in a physics switch, put it below everything here, and make this kinematic. And that means that it isn't two-way anymore. In other words, like, this is just going to do what it's going to do. And anything that gets in its way is going to get knocked out of the way. So I'll run a preview of this, or at least like pre-roll, or not pre-roll, but play through, let's say 250 frames of this, and we can just check this out and see how this looks. So a couple of final things I just want to do before we run the simulation. Okay, couple of things. So first of all, I also want the rope to be able to destroy, like rip apart everything. That's what I've always wanted from day one, was the ball to swing in, but the rope would also cut everything apart. So part of that would be to make the size of this just a little bit bigger. So instead of 5,000, make it 10,000. And we'll copy that group into here, and that just means that this also is part of group A, so it means that the rope will be able to destroy things. The other thing is just the fact that this is kind of hanging really low to the ground. I just realized, like, just thinking about this a bit more, we saw before when it swung in, it was kind of weak, and I think it's just because it doesn't get that momentum it needs. So I'm just going to move this up in the air. Well, I'm going to move the whole thing, but let's just unhide all this stuff so we can see it a bit better. So, just looking at this, I'm just trying to get this a little bit higher up in the air. I'll keep these off for a second. I'm just going to turn this on. And again, I want to really kind of just get an idea of like how fast this is going to move. That's 3-4 seconds to get in. So it's definitely taking a bit of time to get in there. And we could try and play with the speed to compensate a little bit. The speed isn't going to like massively affect things, but it could just help get things going. I'm going to try turning the speed off. It's about the same. I'll keep speed off for now. So again, I'm just trying to get this to have a bit more momentum because I felt like before it was hitting a bit weak. But the main thing is I want to make these be destructible. So as this comes in, the rope is going to rip through, which I think is going to be so cool. And the other thing, let's just increase the gravity on everything a little bit more. So I'm going to set it to 3. And here as well. So it's just going to have a bit more pull overall. Yeah, and that's going to make it fall quicker, so that way it's, 3 seconds before it hits. So I think that's going to help a lot too, just kind of get that momentum it needs. It's already looking a lot better. And again, I'm just trying to look through all this stuff, just triple checking everything, because I want to run the sim, and I just want to make sure everything is perfect, I haven't missed anything. So I might put the bindings below the Voronoi. It's such a trivial thing, but I feel like it's an important one. Just because that way the bindings are being applied to the Voronoi after it gets fractured. Really important. And one last thing, with the ground, we'll just put a shell modifier on that as well. That's just going to help get more accurate collisions. So just set it for the inner amount, so it's going underneath to 100. Again, these are just precautionary things that I'm doing as part of the final cleanup. I just want to get all of this in place, so having that as a thick base, I think, is important. Finally, just to mention this, if we ever wanted to make these more susceptible to breaking, easiest thing to do would be to lower the binds to 3. I just want to throw that out there more just so that way you're aware that those would be things you can do, so that way they've got less stability, they've got less things to grab onto for friction. But I think we're good. There's not really much else I can think of. I'm disabling speed for now, I think, just so that way it's more natural how it comes down. It's just, we're going to let gravity do its thing. So besides just disabling the speed, the only reason I'm kind of like looking around, just triple checking everything, is basically just to do with the fact that when I do kind of run through the sim, everything looks right, except the wrecking ball kind of has a little bit of resilience to hitting the structure. And I'd rather it kind of cut through it like butter. So I'm just trying to think of what possibly could be the issues. And I'm just going to show the preview really quick so this makes sense. Okay, so the good thing is we can see our spline. And so because of that, we can actually see the trajectory here. It swings down and then it starts to arc up, meaning that it's starting to kind of resist the structure cutting through. And if it's already doing that here, then with all of it on, it's definitely not going to cut all the way through. So what I'm thinking is a couple of things here. One thing I might consider is actually turning off the physics shape. So by turning off the physics shape, it means that there's nothing physically holding it there, so it does drop a little bit, which is fine. If anything, I kind of feel like having that drop actually works in our favor. Sorry, I accidentally turned these off because I had them selected when I turned that. So all I'm doing here is I'm just raising it up in the air a little bit to compensate for that drop. And it's mainly I'm just trying to get that swing. It's not going to really make a difference. The one thing that I think could make a bit of a difference is the physics shape here. We cranked the friction up, which I think is kind of cool because it will catch a lot of stuff, but I think we could probably bring this back down and just kind of keep it at the default setting. The only other thing, and we would need to do it for all of these, but right now we're using a lot of bindings in a pretty wide radius. Like I said before, if we were to look in the top view, make a sphere, 100, that's the search radius. I guess it's not too bad, but what I might do is just set the bindings to 3, and we can do that for all of these. It's not that big it's not going to make a massive impact, but it just means that it's got less to hang on to. But the main thing is that with this physics glue, we could hit the 3, but we could set the distance to 50. And that means it still will try to grab things, but it's not going to hold on to like a lot of stuff to really kind of concrete itself down. The other thing is the breakable. I'm going to delete a 0 from each of these. So we got 10,000 for the for how easy it's going to break the connection. Those are pretty much it. So just looking at this now, I just ran a preview. I think it's working out pretty well. The one thing is if we turn the stop operator off, that definitely, I mentioned this earlier, but it will allow it to kind of cut through better. But I always feel like having that on, you kind of tend to get more of a rigid setup where like what gets hit gets destroyed, but the rest of it kind of sticks together. But in this case, I think maybe disabling that, just because again, I'm trying to get a very specific look to this. So we've got these controls, and I think that's the important thing to take away from this is we've created all these controls where we can turn them on to dial things in. But if we are looking for a very specific look, like I am right now, then this is what we can do to be able to turn a few things off and allow it to then be able to react a certain way that we want. So the fact that I want this to be a little less resilient, if we look in 3, 2, 1, there we go, you can see it cuts right through. So you see the trajectory, it's almost pushing all the way entirely through, and this is definitely the hardest thing for it to push through on. So as it swings through now, you can see it's definitely doing a much better job. So I think at this point, I'm going to just keep these two things off. Yeah, we didn't change anything here. No, we just set it to, yeah, so these are all identical. So we can turn all these on now. I think we're at a good point where all of this should be fine. So, I mean, the only thing we changed is we turned that speed operator off, and then we just changed the bind distance down to 50, the max to 3, and then we did that for these guys, it's 333. We turned stop off, and we disabled this. And also one last thing, here we just turned the friction down. So overall, I think that, you know, those little things we've dialed in just means it's going to cut through a lot better. Okay, so that seems to be working a lot better. It still has a bit of resistance as it dips in, but I think overall that's looking really, really cool. So I'm going to run a preview of this so we can check out the finished result, but yeah, I think this is working out nicely. Okay. Okay, so just changing up the angle, there is the finished result. I mean, it's looking pretty cool. There's definitely more I'd like to do, but just kind of going through getting the basic setup, I think from here we could make the planks on top of the roof, like the roof ones, probably lower mass overall, just make them a little bit more, like, less resilient and more reactive to everything being hit. So there's things we can definitely play with, but overall, I think this has turned out pretty cool. Like, we've got something that smashes through, it's completely dynamic, we have the rope dynamics going on, everything tends to work pretty well. So I'm kind of curious. I think from this point, you could definitely do a lot of playing around, move this lower in. You could maybe have it come in from an angle and smash through horizontally, or whatever you want it to do. But overall, I think that this is turning out nicely. Okay, so what do you think? We covered a lot in this lesson, and it's just so fun to do something like this with the wood splintering, the wood fracturing, but also to simulate the rope and the wrecking ball itself, and create a relationship with everything else in between. Now, I just want to get off topic for a second and to say that we're going through crazy times right now. And I hope everyone's staying safe, as well as staying isolated from everything going on. And I do think as much as this is all temporary, it's still important to lay low. And looking at the stats, for instance, on Steam last night, there's 20 million active users playing video games right now, and Netflix is even more. So I think it's really great to have those distractions to kind of keep our mind off of everything, as well as keep ourselves indoors. But I also think it's a chance for us to use this time that we're potentially at home to learn new skills. So I think that's a chance to do something that will pay ourselves back for the rest of our lives by investing back in ourselves. So you all know me, and I love to be entertained, but I also look at the finite time that I have and where I choose that time to go. So you know me, I always focus on growth, and I always think that this is a chance to distract yourself by putting focus on yourself and learning new skills, having something that you can keep after all this is over and apply it to your career and to your life. So I think there's lots of ways to distract ourselves, and safety, of course, is the most important part, both for us, but also for everyone else in our lives. But I do want to leave you with that, whether it is reading books, doing courses, doing free training online, whatever it is, this is a chance to be in a cocoon and come out that beautiful butterfly on the other end where you've made that transformation. So it's just something to think about where you put your time, whether it is into entertainment as a distraction or growth as a distraction, to invest in yourself and have new skills, new ways to equip yourself beyond the storm that we're going through. So thanks for watching, and I do hope you got a lot from this, and I hope you are staying safe. Now, I realize we've got more videos to come, and if you haven't signed up for the training, make sure to use the link below. As I mentioned, you'll get 10 videos in the free class, as well as all of the scene files, including the barn model for this too. And I know for a lot of us, it has been really interesting to kind of see what we're all doing together, all the different types of simulation work and things like that. So it's been really fun and inspiring to see all of that. And it's definitely made me stay focused because I'm committed to get you all of the videos in the training. Now, I will plug myself for a second. Just because I hope that this video is one that serves you well, and if you do want to get access to all the other ones or get notified of future videos, down the bottom right of this video, there's that big red subscribe button. So feel free to click it if you want to get notified of future videos I'm going to be putting out. I try to put out at least 2 to 3 videos per week, and that's something I'm committed to, especially over the coming weeks. So for everyone going through this free class, keep an eye out on your inbox tomorrow. I'm going to be sending you another private video in the training, as we've got lots to cover, and I'm really excited to dial things up in the next video. So stay safe, and I'll talk to you in the next video.